I'd like to welcome you all to Strategy Session 4, Blueprints for Aspiring Architects, Profiling Successful Voucher Models, and our distinguished panelists. Adam and I are your room hosts this morning. If you need anything, please get with us and we'll be happy to take care of you. As always, please fill out your evaluation forms. We've really appreciated the participation that we've had from the previous sessions, and we really do like reading your comments. There are copies of Senator Rogers' PowerPoint presentation on the back table. We weren't quite sure how many would be here, so we didn't hand them all out. If you would like some, just raise your hand and I'll start bringing them around as he starts his presentation. We are going to be going around with a microphone. Adam will do that because these gentlemen would like to answer a lot of questions and give a lot of opportunity for question and answer time. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Enlow, and as he is the CEO of the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. And join me in welcoming them this morning.
Thank you very much, and welcome to our panel. We want to have a very simple structure here. The panelists are going to give 5 to 7 minute comments. I'm going to ask some directed questions that I think might stimulate the conversation. And then we, of course, want your input as much as possible. I say that because I think that the issue of school choice and vouchers is at an interesting nexus right now. As Governor Bush said yesterday, I'll make some introduction comments as well here. Governor Bush yesterday compared sort of what we're doing to milk. And I've been sort of thinking about that a lot, about school choice and vouchers, and what kind of milk is school choice and vouchers? And I've been thinking about that over the last couple of days. Is the voucher movement the soy milk, the rice milk, what kind of milk are we? And I think we're sort of the raw, unadulterated, pure, non-homogenized milk, as I've been thinking about it. And I think that's an important point to make. It's also an important point to make because you're hearing a lot of rhetoric about school choice and where it stands and what's going on with the issue of school choice. And we're lucky to have panelists with us today from 3 different states that have 3 different versions of school choice. Voluntary pre-K program, a special needs voucher program in Georgia, and a tax credit, and then Arizona has a whole plethora of different choices. In terms of background, real quick, to set the stage, for those of you who think that this voucher movement is not going anywhere and that it's not doing a good enough job, let me say the following opening comments. First of all, my former boss, Milton Friedman, and his wife, Rose Friedman, would be very upset if I said that we are doing a good job of going fast, because we're not in this movement. We're not going nearly fast enough and progressing. But I will tell you this. In 1996, when our foundation started, there were 5 school choice programs operating in 5 places in the United States of America. There were 2 old voucher programs in Maine and Vermont. I call those voucher programs, some don't. They're town tuitioning programs, towns that decide for whatever reason not to operate a public school, allow their children to go to any private school in their district or out of the district. It's an old program that's been around since the 1800s. There was a program in Iowa, a tax credit program, tax deduction program, small one. And then there was the new program in Milwaukee and Cleveland. These targeted voucher programs for low-income children. That's what it was in 1996. Depending on how you count, there are now 24 programs operating in 15 states in the District of Columbia in 2009. It's not great progress, but it is progress. When we started, there were less than 10,000 children receiving vouchers and using tax credit scholarships. Now there are 160,000 or so children receiving vouchers and tax credit scholarships, and over 500,000 children and families claiming personal tax credits around the country. We forget that Minnesota has a tax credit program and a tax deduction program that allows private school tuition to be offset, at least on the deduction. When we started in 1996, we knew nothing about the state of school choice. We knew nothing if parents were satisfied, if schools did better, if students did well, and if the money was taken away. All these myths. Over the course of the last a dozen or so years, these have largely been answered in terms of the studies. There is no study that says parents aren't satisfied and more involved. There are very few studies that say that have any discussion about whether participants don't do better. In fact, most subgroups do, although it depends on what study you're looking at. Gerard Robinson, our friend from Bayo, can talk a lot about the studies over here. We know that public schools are positively impacted. We know that no state has ever lost a dime through the introduction of a school voucher program. These are myths that we know. We also know in the last few years that from 1996 onwards to 2003, we basically passed a program every other year. Since 2004, there's been the introduction of a new school choice program every year. whether that's a special needs voucher program or a tax credit program, and most recently in my home state of Indiana. By the way, we love Indiana. Tony Bennett is across the stage over there giving his comments. The last thing we've seen, I think is very important, is we've seen a growing Democrat support for this issue. A significant amount of bipartisan support, and I think Representative Weatherford will talk about that. So that's my way of background and where we're at. So what I'd like to do very quickly is introduce our three speakers, and they're going to be talking in order of my introduction. They'll get up, give their comments, and then we'll come back. Senator Rogers will go first. He's the majority leader in the Georgia State Senate. He was elected to the Senate in 2004 and previously was in the Georgia House of Representatives, and he's going to talk about the Georgia Special Needs Bill. He will be followed by Matt Ladner, who is the Vice President of Research for the Goldwater Institute, where I think he's become one of the nation's leading researchers on the effectiveness of school choice, and certainly a Florida lover. Anyone who knows Matt knows that he loves the Florida model. And as past director, however, he's not just a researcher. In his past post at the Alliance for School Choice as Director of State Projects, he implemented and passed bills around the country. And he will be followed by Representative Will Rutherford, who's the chair of the Education Policy Council in the Florida House of Representatives. Representative Rutherford, Rutherford, I'm saying Rutherford because it's Indiana and I'm thinking motorsports right now. I apologize. It's all this. Yeah. Well, you know, and then we think about, you know, SEC and all the football as well. So, first elected to the Florida House in 2006, and what I found amazing, in addition to the fact he's a member of a very large family of 9. He's on 5 committees already. I mean, and very powerful committees, and chair of one of them. So this is our distinguished panel, and we'll go ahead and start with Senator Rogers.
Thank you, Robert. It is an honor to be here today. I want to briefly talk about what we've done in Georgia over the last, I guess, 3 years, because we've really stepped on the accelerator when it comes to school choice, which I like to call educational choice. We have passed stealing from our good friends in Florida, the Vpk Voucher Program, stealing from our friends in Arizona, the scholarship tax credit, stealing from friends somewhere, the public school choice bill last year. And then we came up with one on our own called Move On When Ready. Now, I don't know that Robert or anyone who followed us last year considers this too much of a voucher program, but it does do exactly what we intend to do, and that is from the very outset, the notion that education money follows the student. And when you can establish that fact, you're well on your way towards success in educational choice. And what our Move On When Ready bill does, which is now the law, it says that a student in the 10th or 11th grade, if they're ready to move on to college, they can go to college, and that money that was funding them at the high school level goes with them to college. And amazingly enough, none of the teacher organizations battled us on that. Which I was just shocked. Maybe in their mind they thought, well, if a student leaves, that's less students I have in the classroom. Or I don't know what their thought was, but they didn't battle us on that, and we certainly didn't point out that this was a voucher program. But you know, when you have these successes, I think we could all, through following what has been stated over the last couple of days here and what you'll hear today, we can clearly, most of us, come to the understanding that educational choice is the right way to go. But as you know, in a legislative environment, just determining what is the right thing to do doesn't necessarily mean the right thing is going to happen. You have to have 2 things, and I'll touch on these real quickly. You have to have leadership. There are so many issues which you can sit around and talk to your friends and say, wow, you know, we really ought to do that. That's the right thing to do. But until somebody steps up and says, I'll take the bullets, I'll take the arrows, I'll lead, it's not going to get done. We have had that in Georgia with our state senator, Eric Johnson, who is currently running for governor. If he becomes governor, I think it's safe to say he'll be the most pro-school choice governor in the United States of America. He introduced a universal voucher bill last year and twisted every possible arm he could. Didn't make it, but he's 100% sold on it. And then you have to have leadership. Our Speaker of the House has exhibited a lot of leadership. And I'll give you 2 quick stories. And this is when I talk about you have to have leadership and luck. This is luck as well. I don't know how it is in your House of Representatives, but when we passed the special needs voucher, which actually passed out of the Senate relatively easy, we consider ourselves more conservative than our friends in the House. I have some House members here. The bill got over to the House, and their education committee is a tough one to work with, but we made it through. We got it to the floor. And the rules in our House of Representatives allows that when you have a vote come up, the Speaker can hold the vote open as long as he wants. Now, we in the Senate have it. It's 1 minute. votes don't go up on the board, so we don't know unless you sneak around and look on the back side of the computer. You don't know who's voted for what. But in the House, they're up on the board, and the Speaker can sit there and count them up. So he held that vote open, and I was in the chamber at that time just watching what was happening, and he held it open, and he held it open, and he kept saying, have all members voted? And everyone he wanted to vote another way, of course, he starts looking at them. Have all members voted? And he finally got to 90, and when he got to 90, the second he got to 90, he closed the vote. He said the Speaker votes yay, measure passes. And so you have to have people that are willing to lead. You have to have a little bit of luck, because in Georgia, it takes 91 votes to pass a bill in the House. And then on our tuition tax credit, and I got to give the Speaker credit here, too. I'm not sure if he knew what he was doing. But a couple years ago, he and I decided to embark on this notion of getting rid of the property tax in Georgia. You can imagine how easy that might have been. Well, we had all the normal people that would stand against school choice in a tizzy. I mean, they were going crazy, the fact that we were talking about getting rid of the property tax. I mean, that is their golden cash cow. So they were all just going crazy about that. Well, at the same time, we had a friend of the school choice movement that I believe has spoken before this group, David Cassis, who at the time was a public school teacher, introduced our tuition tax credit bill. Well, he did it very quietly. And they're all worried about us getting rid of the property tax, and that thing just sails right through the House. Nobody says a word about it. It gets over to us in the Senate. David comes over and he says, now, guys, listen, pretty soon they're going to get wind of what it is we're doing here. Do not change. I mean, even if you find a typographical error, do not change it, because it cannot come back to us. So we didn't change it. We didn't find any errors, but we didn't change it, and it passed, and the governor thankfully signed it into law. So we've done some good things, but again, you got to have leadership, you got to have a little bit of luck, and we've had both on those. When we start talking about school choice, and I'm going to get through my presentation here real quickly. I think there's so many things we can look at as far as determining, is it working by measuring this? Is it working by measuring this? I like to try to be more basic in not only what I do as a legislator, but just my general thought, and that is, who are the people that care most about education? It's the parents. And do they like it? And if the parents like it, who am I to say whether a program's working or not if they approve of it? I mean, we can look at all the measurements from here to Sunday, but if the parents approve of it and they like what's happening for their children, heck, I'm just an elected official. I can't, I don't want any elected official saying what's best for my children. And so if parents like it, I tend to think we're moving in the right direction. So with that in mind, we did a study. We've had the special needs voucher for 2 years, and a study was commissioned to look at, well, what has happened? And are the parents satisfied? What was the situation with these children before they went into the system, and what is it after 2 years? So we'll briefly run through these slides here. A wonderful title there. All right, how satisfied with children's academic progress in public school? As you can see, they weren't too satisfied to begin with. Now, this is one of the things that when you're selling a special needs voucher that I think is so important and is one of the best things you can talk about, and that is that you have students who are not excelling at their particular school, regardless of whether the teacher could be wonderful, the school could be wonderful, but you have situations where certain students, because of special needs, are literally being picked on. Now, I'm blessed that none of my children are there, and I wasn't there, but can you imagine not wanting to go to school because someone's going to pick on you? I mean, that, to me, that is the biggest selling point of this, is to say, listen, these are children who can't go to this school because the other students don't want them there. And I don't know how you can, as a legislator or just as a human being, can say, no, let's keep them, let's force them to stay in that environment. So as you can see, we had a vast number of these students who were, in fact, being picked on because of their disability. Physically assaulted, I mean, the number is low, but my Lord, 26% being physically assaulted. I mean, if that's 1%, that's too many. How satisfied were you with the attention your student was given? Obviously, they weren't too satisfied. How satisfied with public schools' responsiveness were you? They weren't satisfied with the response. Did you ever personally come in conflict over the IEP of your? I mean, this is what the school develops the IEP, and do you, as the parent, did you come in conflict with it? And obviously, better than 6 out of 10 did. Again, not satisfied at all with the services provided. So here's the key one, and I'm pretty much going to close with this. The overall satisfaction. It's been in place now for 2 years. On a scale of 1 to 10, those parents that were interviewed had an overall satisfaction of 4.4 with their previous school, and now it's 9.2. Now, if I go to you and say, all right, we're going to take the same amount of money to spend on this exact same students, and right now your satisfaction is 4.4, but if we spend the same amount of money on your student, 2 years from now it's going to be 9.2, who in their right mind would be against that? Well, no one would. And that is exactly what's happening with our program, and that's why it's growing at the rate it's growing. And by the way, we're not talking about, because oftentimes the suggestion is that these are only the wealthy families can afford this. As you can see, we had 27% of the people involved had a total family income of less than $50,000. And this is so important, and this is one of the reasons why our governor did support it, and that is he's a firm believer that you have to have, as he calls it, skin in the game. And as you can see, 81% of those parents are not only taking the scholarship, but are willing to put in more money on top, of course, of all the taxes they pay to go to their public education system, but are willing to put in even more money into the system to make sure that their child goes to or is placed in a learning environment where they can succeed. So I'm not going to go through all this, but the bottom line is that it's working. I know among legislators there is always a fear that if you do this, you're going to go home and you're going to get crucified by the teachers. I will stand before you today and tell you that is not going to happen, or at least it hasn't happened in my case, and I'll close with this one statement. The SAT scores in Georgia, we have 159 counties. We have 180 school systems. The SAT scores just came out, and the county in which I reside had the #1 SAT score in the whole state. So my public schools in my county are doing better than anywhere else in the whole state, and yet everybody there knows where I am on the issue of school choice, and I can proudly go home and say, this problem is bigger than just our county. And even if you have the best SAT scores, what is the problem with giving parents another choice? And it has worked for me. I haven't got thrown out of office yet, so don't be fearful of it. This is something that sells because it makes common sense. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having me here today. The interesting thing about the voucher movement is that for a long time we've kind of been the shock troops of the education reform movement. We're the bad guys. Gosh, we're these evil people that want to destroy public education. You've all heard this, right? Of course, that's not true. But the first thing, I'm, from Arizona, and one of the things I think it's very important to note that often gets overlooked is the strategic value of the school voucher movement. In Arizona, we got our first wave of school choice in 1994, and members of the Arizona legislature were pushing a small, modest voucher bill, right? Oh, no, vouchers, can't have vouchers. Vouchers bad. So what did they get instead? Instead, they got the nation's strongest charter school law. We've got 500 charter schools in our medium-sized state in Arizona. You can literally drive down the streets of Phoenix and, oh, look, there's a charter school. Oh, look, there's another one, okay? Far more students going to charter schools than any, school voucher program anywhere in the country, okay? And that same year in 1994, we got open enrollment, both intra and inter-district, okay? Well, fast forward 3 years. Once again, the voucher bill gets introduced. No, vouchers evil, must stop vouchers. So what did they get? We got the nation's first scholarship tax credit program. Individual taxpayers in Arizona can make a donation to a scholarship group. The scholarship group then gives scholarships to kids to go to private schools. Okay, that program has been expanded several times. Well, then let's fast forward into the midway through this decade. Again, we actually got a universal voucher bill out of one of the chambers in 2005, I believe. Which shocked everyone. Again, vouchers bad, must stop vouchers. What do we get? Well, instead of vouchers, we get a corporate tax credit to supplement our individual tax credit. And we actually get 2 small voucher programs, one for children in foster care and one for special needs, okay? And, by the way, an expansion of the original scholarship tax credit, okay? In every instance, right, the ball is being moved forward, right, under the threat of vouchers, right? The big bad voucher boogeyman is out there, right? But we're making progress along the way. One question I often get asked, right, is people say, well, Ladner, the school choice stuff's so great. Why are Arizona's NAEP scores so low? And the answer is very simple. The answer is that for every single child that has exited the public school system in Arizona through one of these options, including charter schools, there's been 3 new kids come into the system. Okay? So the amount of competitive pressure that we're putting on the public schools, even in Arizona, is extremely limited, and we need to do a lot more. Right? We basically established a beachhead, but really that's all it is at this point, is a beachhead. We have to go a lot further and do a lot more. There are things to be, proud of about what we've accomplished today. For instance, I wrote an article for the Journal of Catholic Education 2 years ago that was talking about how Arizona is defying the national trend in Catholic school closures. Okay, now I'm an Anglican, but I am a great admirer of Catholic schools. I think Catholic schools are a national treasure, especially in the inner city areas of our country. Right. These schools have been often the only high-quality school option within any reachable distance to children in the inner city. And all around the country, we're losing them. They're going under, okay? Except for in Arizona. Peter Mayer 2 years ago wrote an article for Education Next, and he said, basically his thesis was that charter schools were going to be the death knell of inner-city Catholic schools. And he had evidence to support this, evidence from a RAND study in Michigan. If you're Detroit and your population is stagnant and you've got this Blaine Amendment that was put in place, I believe, in the early 70s by the teacher unions, there's no possibility of doing private school choice in Michigan. There was an attempt to repeal by the ballot initiative this Blaine Amendment, which failed. The teacher unions defeated. Basically, absent some heroic effort, right? These schools are going to close. We'll see the last Catholic school close in Detroit in the not too distant future. Some of them are converting into charter schools, okay, which I have mixed feelings about. We have exactly the opposite phenomenon going on in Arizona. In Arizona, every Catholic school within the greater Phoenix area is either just completed or else is in the midst of a capital campaign. We have new Catholic schools opening in the Phoenix area, even, in defiance of these national trends. Catholic school enrollment is up. Private school enrollment overall is up as a percentage of the student body in Arizona, despite the fact that we have 500 charter schools running around. Okay, so I wrote this article for the Journal of Catholic Education just basically to make the point, right, that this can be true. I mean, this article that Mr. Mayer wrote was extremely problematic for someone like me who both supports charter schools and private school choice, right? I don't support charter schools so that I can drive Catholic schools out of business, right? That's not what I was hoping to have. I mean, they should have to compete, right? But the playing field needs to be a lot more even than even here within Arizona, right? I mean, if you think about it, basically what our state says is that if you want to go to a public school, we'll give that, that child gets $9,700, okay? You want to go to charter school, you get about $7,800. If you want to go to a private school, maybe kind of sort of indirectly through the tax credit system, you might get a scholarship that's worth $2,000. Okay? Now, somebody can convince me that going to a public school in Arizona where 44% of the fourth graders score below basic in reading is 4 times more in the public interest than going to the Catholic school. Okay, my email address is mladner@goldwaterinstitute.org. I'd love to have someone explain that to me because it just doesn't make any sense to me. Okay? I called the superintendent of the Catholic schools in Maricopa County, a lady named Mary Beth Mueller. I asked her, how much of an impact did the tax credit have on this? She says it's gigantic. The bottom line is we have families in our schools that are struggling financially to stay there. And the tax credit program gives them a source of funding, a possibility, to keep these struggling families in their schools. But we need to do so much more. We can't accept a system that like I described it, where we're going to throw money at kids that go in the public schools and provide a small subsidy for those that are not. Things ought to be equal, right? The state ought to be neutral as to what kind of school you go to. It shouldn't push you towards private school, nor should it try to prohibit you from going to a private school. Okay. Our voucher programs, unfortunately, we had the nation's first voucher program for foster care children. And this is a fantastic idea. Dan Lips from the Heritage Foundation was the person that came up with this. And, the bottom line is that foster care children bounce from school to school to school to school to school. Okay? Every time they change foster families, they wind up being zoned for a different public school, right? And they wind up having to transfer. Now, that kind of hyper transferring is very academically damaging. Okay? I mean, it's devastating. Okay? So our lawmakers passed a bill that basically said, look, if you're a foster care child, we're going to make you eligible for a school voucher, which would at least have the possibility of keeping you in the same school over time. Okay? I think that, I like to say whether you're a conservative, a liberal, libertarian, or vegetarian, right, that in theory at least, we all want what's best for kids, right? And if you think, and this is an odd thing for someone who's working a libertarian think tank to say, but if you think about, the John Rawls standard, right? John Rawls says that, he's a left of center political philosopher that's very huge on the left. He basically says, well, societal ethics ought to be determined as if we were all born or living behind a veil of ignorance, and we don't know who we're going to be in its forthcoming society, right? You might be born the son of a billionaire, and you might be born a child that's put into foster care, right? Now, if you're born a child that's going into foster care, is this the system you want? You want a system that bounces you around from school to school to school, that basically ruins any chance you have of learning how to read? No. Right? That's not what you want. And this is basically what Rawls says, right? Behind the veil of ignorance, you want to cover your downside, right? You want a system that will at least give the disadvantaged a chance. We had that. We had that program put in place. The same for children with disabilities, right? Following Florida's leads, and Georgia's doing a great job with it. The current IEP special ed system has the most dissatisfied parents in the entire public school system. And it's not for lack of money. It's just extremely frustrating. Unfortunately, the Arizona Supreme Court ruled these programs to be unconstitutional under the Arizona Constitution. We have a Blaine Amendment in our state, and unfortunately, it is a Blaine Amendment that we cannot appeal to the United States Supreme Court because of the way it's structured. It basically says you can't go to a private or parochial school, and that hamstrings our ability to go all the way up to the U.S. Supremes. So what our lawmakers did in Arizona was to simply pass a new corporate tax credit program. We called it Lexi's Law. It was named after a young woman who was the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case, a young child with multiple disabilities. We got that through in a special session, a very, very difficult budget year. Obviously, everyone's having one, and Arizona was one of the epicenters of the housing bubble, and our problem is far worse than average. So, looking forward, we need to figure out in Arizona, absent a United States Supreme Court decision that will get rid of these Blaine amendments, which is what we need. Okay, these things are relics of anti-Catholic bigotry from the Ku Klux Klan era. Literally, and they ought to be done away with. But absent that, what we're going to have to do in Arizona is figure out new ways to expand tax credits to actually create competition for students. We're going to have to find new taxes to create credits against. Might be sales tax, might be property taxes. These things are not going to be easy to figure out. But that that is the path that is open to us. And then finally, one thing that I've been thinking about lately in the school choice movement is we're almost always talking about revenue, right? How can we equalize revenue? One thing that is coming down the pike is that we've got to do something about cost on the private school side. There is a private school in Tucson, a private Christian school in Tucson, who's working on this, and between a combination of using the tax credit and parent volunteers in the school and the Corporation of Technology-based learning to substitute for labor. Okay, this private school is growing rapidly, and their goal is to get their tuition down to zero. Okay, now when their headmaster told me this, I said, "You shouldn't do that," and he said, "Yeah, I know. Don't worry, we're not there yet." Right? It's the skin in the game theory. Okay, but I think that some of the disruptive technology stuff we're going to hear about later is going to apply just as much to private schools as it is to public schools. And the private schools need to get ahead of the game here, right? It's not all about revenue. It's also about costs. And anything we can do to keep costs down and quality high. And by the way, these guys have value-added scores. They're doing a good job with the school, right? Also helps, right? So ultimately, I think there's a lot more we can do on the tax credit front. I'm very disappointed about the voucher decision, but we're going to move forward. We're going to find ways, and hopefully we'll get at least most of the way there in Arizona and elsewhere. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, hello, I'm Will Weatherford. I'm going to try to be brief so we can get into the Q&A. First of all, I want to say that we are blessed to have had Governor Jeb Bush be our governor for the state of Florida for 8 years. When the governor came to Florida, there was an explosion of education reforms across the state of Florida. And we are just now starting to see the full ramifications of it. And we get to take credit for it in the legislature of some of the things he did 6 and 8 years ago. But really, it was an explosion of education reforms, and I'm so happy he's got this foundation, has allowed us to be a part of it. I'm a poster child for school choice. I grew up in a family of 9 children, as was mentioned earlier. I don't know why anybody would want to have 9 children. Now that I have my own, that's a different issue that I'm not here to talk about. But I will tell you, I was homeschooled through the 6th grade. I went to private school 7th and 8th grade, and I went to public school 9th through 12th. So I literally have seen firsthand, and as you can tell, I'm a young guy, so it wasn't too long ago. I've seen firsthand the importance of school choice and the importance of giving parents that empowerment. We have a legislature that is basically prides itself on pushing the envelope when it comes to school choice. I'm lucky to have 4 of my colleagues from the Florida House sitting on the front row, so the pressure is on for me to push for Florida. But we take it so seriously that in the Florida House, we actually have a school choice caucus. And our school choice caucus chairman actually here is Steve Precourt. I mean, we take it that serious. And I have to tell you, Senator, in Florida, it's the Florida House that's the conservative chamber, I can promise you. But I'm not here to talk about all the programs, although we have several programs that are doing very well. The McKay Scholarship has been talked about. The Corporate Tax Scholarship, Doug is here who represents them, has done tremendously well with 26,000 students statewide. What I'm here to talk about is the Vpk program. The Vpk program is the largest voucher program in the country, and nobody knows it. In fact, I had forgotten it. But what's interesting, and to give you a little history of how it came about, there was a ballot initiative that was pushed in 2002 and passed to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that of course passed to force us to have a universally free voluntary pre-K program in the state of Florida. Governor Bush, in his infinite wisdom, decided to take this as an opportunity to create a voucher program. We didn't go around talking about a voucher program. We didn't push it as a voucher program, but that's exactly what we got. And so in 2004, we wrote the implementing language that created this program in the state of Florida that now serves 150,000 students. I want to give you a little bit of the numbers. There's a total of 5,660 VPK providers in the state of Florida. I mentioned there's 150,000 students, but here's what you need to know. 83% of the students in this program go to a private school, 83%. 17% obviously go to a public school provider. 23% of the private school providers are faith-based providers. And this is all funded through state tax dollars. The actual funding model is about a $2,600 voucher that goes to every provider per student, and it varies a little bit depending on the cost of living in different areas of the state. But it is a tremendously successful program, and the dollars do truly follow the student. As far as the school year, it's a 540 hours. There's 2 programs. There's a summer program. There's a full school year program, 540 hours for the school year program, 300 hours for the summer program. There are caps so that if you get more than 11 students in any one classroom, you have to bring in a second instructor. These are trained instructors. This is not daycare. This is an institution of learning. It's been a tremendous boon for the state of Florida, and we've seen a lot of results, which I will talk about. There are also a lot of private provider requirements. Not anybody can just open up a VPK program and get this $2,600 per student check in the mail. There are a lot of criteria and hurdles that they have to go through to make sure that the quality of our VPK, which is what's most important, is there. As far as curriculum requirements, we give them a lot of flexibility. Each school or provider can select its own curriculum. However, it has to fall within the Florida state standards. So there is no universal curriculum. We allow each VPK to have some flexibility there, but they know that there's going to be an assessment and that they're going to be held accountable on that assessment at the back end, and therefore they stay within a pretty tight framework so we can test them. When you talk about the assessment, every year, state law, when a child goes into kindergarten in the state of Florida, within the first 30 days, the very first 30 days, every child has to get tested, basically, to find out where their skill set is. And basically every VPK provider that exists in Florida, those scores that those children get on those tests then reflect, and actually each school gets a grade. Each VPK provider gets a grade based on how well those students do. So there's a very strong accountability for this program, and we're working on better ways to even make it more accountable, even talking about possibly testing the students on the front end when they come into the VPK program and seeing some of the learning gains that take place during that year. I think we all know 20 years ago it was hard to nail down the data of how important VPK programs were for students, but I think we know that the data is pretty overwhelming, that those ages between 3 and 5, these kids are such sponges. They are learning and adapting and expanding their ability to learn in future years at that age. And Florida has recognized that, and we've embraced it, and we've tried to create a program that is the best in the country. To give you some just quick numbers as far as results of what we've seen. In 2004, when we first passed this implementing legislation, there are 2 things that we test: alphabet recognition and sound recognition. Okay, those are what we test when they come into kindergarten. As far as alphabet recognition is concerned, when we started in 2004, there was a 63% alphabet recognition by our kindergarten students. Now, just 4 years later, as of 2008 numbers, it's 77%, which is a 14% increase. When we do sound recognition, it was a 58% recognition rate. 4 years later, it was 68%. So it's working, is my point. The program is working. Not only is it a great voucher program, but the quality is good, and the students are learning, and they're continuing to go up. Again, just to kind of wrap it up as we get into the questions, the Florida's VPK program is the largest in the country, 150,000. It's been tremendously successful, and I know we can talk a little bit more about this. And we were talking earlier, why has it been successful? Why has it been that no one has really made a fuss about this? You never read about it. And I think the reason, and it goes back to the speech that the Governor Bush gave yesterday at luncheon, which is if we were redrawing up the education system in the state of Florida, if we were starting from scratch, we certainly would not create what we have today, right? And that's what we did. When we created VPK, universal VPK in the state of Florida, we started from scratch. There were no preconceived notions. The union did not fight us nearly as much as they do for reform. It's a lot easier to create something from scratch than it is to reform it. And I think this speaks to that. And so I'm not saying we have to just scrap the education altogether, although there are some arguments for that. But certainly it's an example of what can be done when you start from the beginning, when you bring the stakeholders to the table, and when you can make an example out of something. This constitutional amendment was actually forced on the legislature. They didn't think we were acting fast enough. And as you know, when the citizens or when certain interest groups don't think you're moving fast enough, they decide to put something on the ballot and force your hand. And they did that. What they did not expect, what the advocates of VPK did not expect, is that we would create the largest voucher program in the United States of America, and it's doing very well, and we're honored to do that. As far as school choices goes in general, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I know I thought it was very interesting to hear you talk about, Robert, some of the what's happened over the last 15 years since the foundation has been involved. We are just at the tip. We are now starting to talk in a language, I think, that people can appreciate and understand, which is, we use the word voucher, but what we're really starting to talk about is being student-centered. Let's center our attention towards a student, not towards the classroom, not towards the system, the school system, which is what everybody wants to talk about. We have to radically change the way we talk about school choice, I think. Find a way to communicate. We need more focus groups. We need more PR, frankly, on the issue. And as we continue to educate people on it, I think we'll have tremendous success across the country. Our hope in Florida is to push the envelope. We want to lead the nation when it comes to school choice. And we're going to do a bill that deals with corporate tax scholarships this year that we're going to swing for the fences on. It's going to hopefully be the largest tax credit program in the country. So we're very excited about that. I'm honored to be here. And with that, I'll shut up. So thank you very much.
I knew there's more about Florida than just the weather. Love it. So thank you very, very much. As we go into the questions, I have a couple directed questions that I've been thinking about. You sort of answered the first one about, why was there no fight about the VPK? Because there are a lot of us in this room, and one of them in the back, Virginia, who's been a warrior for school choice for a long time, Virginia Ford, and who's running the D.C. effort here, being a large part of it, to keep the D.C. voucher program alive. There are a lot of us who have been in this, and I guess maybe I'm like a little punch drunk, and we've been hit so many times and so hard. What do you guys think the future of vouchers lies? I mean, because does it continually lie in this bloody battle that we have to fight every single step of the way, or is there some different future that you guys see?
I'll answer that. I mean, I think the key for us moving forward is to not step onto our opponent's battlefield. Right? Our opponents want to make this about public school versus private school and destroying public schools, right? And that's the wrong battlefield, okay? If some of you have ever seen the play or the movie Henry V, there's this beautiful scene at the end where Henry is wooing the French princess after defeating the French army, right? And, he's doing his best. She's kind of cool but warming up eventually, and she says, "May it be possible that I should love the enemy of France?" And he says, "No, Kate, it is not possible. For in loving me, you should love the friend of France. For I love France so much that I will not part with a village of it." Okay? I love public education so much. I'm a public education guy. I graduated from public schools. My mother was a public school teacher. My 2 sons attend public schools. Okay? And I love public schools so much that I want them to work, and I will do anything, including school choice. Not only school choice, anything to get that to happen, okay? And you're either with us or you're against us, right? We're not the reactionaries in this conversation, right? We're the progressives. We're the ones that want progress, right? And school choice is a powerful instrument to develop that progress, right? It is a decentralized system of bottom-up accountability, and it has got to be a part of the solution. You will never do as well as you can in improving public schools without that element. You're always going to be depending on the top down. The top down does not work all the time, okay? It can work and do a lot of progress, right? But you've got to have the bottom up as well.
Other comments?
I'll just add on to that. We were talking last night, Representative Eric Fresen from Miami and I were talking with a former legislator from Florida about some focus groups they had done in the past about what people feared about school choice. And Representative Arza, who we were talking to, made a great point, which was when they talked to people and they said, "What is it that you see that is wrong with school choice or that you have fear about?" And their fear is that we're abandoning the public school. Because certainly we all know there are failing schools, particularly in our urban and core areas in our country. And the fear is that we're giving up. And Americans don't like to give up. We refuse to give up. And so there has to be an articulation to the public and to the citizens and to the parents that we're not giving up on public schools. Frankly, we're trying to help them. We're trying to make this about the student, and we're never going to give up on a public school. We're going to make it better. And if it means we have to put more money into it, then that's what it means. If it means we have to get better teachers, then that's what it means. If it means we have to have better accountability, that's what it means. But that's not an argument for not having school choice. It's not an argument for that. So I think and that's why I went back to my first comments, which is we have to change the way we talk about it. We have to change the way that we articulate our principles when it comes to school choice, because I think the initial surge of school choice is valid, and while valid, the average everyday parent doesn't get it yet. And if we can convince them about that the competition is a good thing for our public schools, and that a rising tide lifts all boats. If we can convince them that and to get them to believe it, I think that the vouchers have a very bright future. And so I'm very bullish on whether it's vouchers or tax scholarships or any sort of free choice when it involves schools going forward, because I believe the education is just getting started when it comes to the parents.
I'll quickly comment on that. C.S. Lewis once talked about being progressive, and he said being progressive is not going faster down the wrong road, but recognizing that you're going down the wrong road, stopping and turning around. The first person that can do that's the most progressive. And I think that's, our friends on the other side, often fall into that camp of wanting to speed up going down the wrong road. You asked, is the battle going to be bloody? And I think absolutely. It's never going to stop. And that's because, honestly, the other side's argument is not factually based. It is only based on emotion. And they're not going to relinquish that. The data is on our side. The facts are on our side. So the logic is on our side. So we'll still continue to battle these at every step of the way. But I think what's most important is to make sure, as you pointed out, that when we discuss this issue, we're talking about it from the right perspective, and that is always the perspective of the student. The other side, I remember this, as I have now incorporated into every public speech I give, I talk about educational choice. I was talking to our Rotary Club, and one of our school board members was there, and he stood up and said, "Well, that's going to be bad for the system." And I just simply said, there's the problem. I'm talking about the child. He's talking about the system. And that really is the problem.
So you've heard it here first. The school choice movement is progressive. not something that we've been called very often. One more question, then we'll go to the audience, and that is, so there are a lot of people here from states that are, I wouldn't say on the cusp, but are really considering school choice. We've got Montana, we've got Nebraska, Oklahoma. What lessons could you talk to them about your implementation? Because you talk about tip of the iceberg. In some ways, passing the bill is the tip of the iceberg, and then comes the work of implementation. What are some of the things you can pass on and lessons learned you can share about your states and when you implement?
I'll be real quick about this. The biggest mistake you can make is when you're drafting legislation, giving too much power to the bureaucracy to determine the rules and regulations. You need to put that in statute, because if you let them run with it, you're not going to get what you thought you were going to get.
That's true. I would second that. I wrote a 124-page paper for the Alliance for School Choice a couple of years ago about program implementation. And what I would say is, man, there has been a lot of mistakes made over the year. I mean, a lot, right? I mean, we've got the scars. Don't do it, right? Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't do the dumb things that we've done over the years. We've made a lot of progress over years. We understand now a lot better about things like that and other things about bill design. Be very careful about your bill design. Find out the mistakes that other states have made. Have your bill vetted by the Institute for Justice, because you're going to court, whether you like it or not. But yeah, there's no need to reinvent the wheel at this point. There's been a lot of people that died on a lot of picket fences, so you wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I would echo those comments and just say, when, for example, again, when Governor Bush came to Florida, we did try to reinvent the wheel. I mean, we had to, because there was not an infrastructure nationally that existed where we could go pick off the best practices, but now there is. So if you're a legislator from a state that lacks in school choice options, you have within this room just a plethora of states represented that have tremendous programs running. And I know in Florida we'd be more than willing to talk to you. I'm sure Arizona the same. In Georgia, there are best practices, and there are states that are doing it better than others. And utilize the resources that are out there to figure out what they are, because there's so much at your fingertips. And again, even the states who are pushing the envelope, we're still trying to do more. And maybe as opposed to coming out and hitting a single, you may be able to hit a double or triple right out of the gate. So I think be bold would be my verbiage to anybody who's thinking about engaging in school choice in your state. Be bold.
Excellent. So be bold in your questions, please, and make them questions. I think Representative Steve, you had one first, Mr. Representative.
I appreciated that each of you talked about the child, and that's where our focus needs to be in empowering parents to make decisions that's best for the child. When you talked about universal pre-K, and I appreciate that that's been an opportunity for vouchers, how do we get it back, though, even at that age, to saying maybe tax credits for parents to buy the tools to help them teach their children at home, for those who believe that their kids aren't really ready for a school setting, but they still want their children to be ready and have the skills necessary. So as a part of even what you're doing with vouchers, having the credits available for parents who want those kids to be trained so they can get the computer programs and things, and let that be credited through taxes.
And Representative, you're talking about for the Vpk program, giving the parents the tools. That's a great point, and frankly, I don't know if that's something we've addressed in Florida. The point is that for those of you who didn't understand it or hear them, is what can we do in the state of Florida, for example, to give parents of VPK students who maybe aren't ready for the classroom setting, and maybe they have a disability, or maybe they're just a little bit slower in development than maybe some of the other kids their age. What can we do? I don't know if we've addressed that, and that's something that we'll probably have to look at. I think it's a great point. There could be some things that we could do through virtual school, where we could arm our parents with the resources that they need. I think that would be one thing off the top of my head that we could do. But that's a really good point, and I wish I had an answer for it, but I don't.
And that's why I'm asking you to think about it.
It's on my radar. It's there.
We actually have virtual school in Georgia, Georgia Virtual Academy, which has been a great success. It's gone from 0 to 5,000 students in 2 years, and now has a 1,000 student waiting list. It does exactly what you're saying, and what our friends in the education cabal, or whatever you want to call them, what they didn't figure out in this thing was, when we started this, they thought, all right, well, you're going to have all these students transfer from the public school to the virtual academy, which is still a public school, but it's done online. And the reality of what has happened in the first 2 years is half of those students that are now part of Georgia Virtual Academy were already homeschool students. And so all this offered them was a lot of the resources that, even though they pay all their tax dollars, they weren't allowed to have because they decided to educate their children at home. Well, now they have those resources, and we want to see that expand much further. And I think one of the problems we have just in the whole notion of education is we get locked into this belief that education is, whether it's a homeschool, private school, or public school, is what happens between 8 and 3:30.
Yeah.
Education is what happens 24 hours a day. I mean, if your education for your child stops the moment that child gets off the bus, you got a lot of problems. So we need to think of the context of education as educating a child 24/7, and how do we do that?
Yeah. So we have delegates, and we have over here, we got lots of questions. That's great. Please, go ahead.
I have a question for Will and Matt. I assume you don't have a Blaine in Florida.
We do.
They do.
How in the world did you get vouchers for pre-K and religious schools with a Blaine?
Because nobody wants to make mad those VPK parents. There'll be a riot in the state of Florida if they did. I mean, truthfully, there's arguments to be made that it could be unconstitutional, frankly.
And no one has sued.
No. We passed,
amazing.
Governor Bush passed opportunity scholarships his second year as governor, which were pure vouchers and statutorily, and it was thrown out based on the Blaine Amendment. But the VPK has actually stood firm, and no one has challenged it. And truthfully, it's as I said before, we started from scratch, and stakeholders were at the table. And so when we created this program, there was buy-in from everyone, and the data shows it's working. As opposed to taking a system that is already entrenched and completely unionized and trying to get them to reform is a much harder task. And so that we did have lawsuits at that level, and that's why our opportunity scholarships, which were the vouchers, were thrown out. But as far as VPK, it's held firm.
Have you ever heard of QRS, Quality Rating System? It's raising its ugly head in Missouri, and it's an effort to get one government entity to make the decisions on the curriculum and what happens in our preschools, and then the vouchers follow what they determine are quality schools. I hope in your system, in the plan you put in, you don't have an opening for that to happen. That's what I'm trying to protect.
We don't have that, and as chairman of the Education Council, I can assure you that won't be happening during my tenure.
Okay, and one more for good. One more for Matt Ladner. Matt, on your Catholic schools, I have often in Missouri, which has a tremendous Catholic school system, wondered why in the world before they close they don't show up at the public schools and say, you're responsible for us. They have such clout that they don't use nationally. They should be showing up there saying, you're responsible for us and we'll only leave if you give us $3,000 per kid.
Yeah,
Why don't they do that?
I've heard stories that there was something like that happened in Australia, where they all threatened to shut down on count day and send their kids to the public schools. And but I don't know, and I can't speak for Catholic schools. I'm an Anglican, so.
Quickly, let me add to something that Matt about the Blaine Amendment. Something that's happened recently on the lawsuit front. Florida was sued. Arizona was sued a long time ago. I mean, that case is still. But Georgia hasn't been touched. Indiana hasn't been touched. Utah hasn't been touched, as I understand, legally. I mean, the referendum, but not legally on the McKay. The lawsuit, it's very interesting to see what's happening recently, that they're not challenging in certain states. Some of that's based on the different Blaine amendments. But remember, Wisconsin did have a Blaine amendment, and they passed that in the United States Supreme Court. So it is interesting to see this trend. Delegate Stockstill, please, and then we'll question there and a question here, and then we can keep going.
Thank you. Nancy Stockstill from Maryland. Matt, this question is for you. I had the bill in for foster care children a couple years ago, and the holdup was the transportation. How did you handle transporting those kids, those foster kids, back to the school that they chose to go to?
Yeah, it's a tricky issue, and it comes up in voucher programs all around the country. And it's basically a lot of the people that raise it, some of them are sincere and some of them aren't. Right? Some of them are using it as a make the perfect the enemy the good. And you could say, I've seen legislative hearings in Texas, for instance, where this issue was raised, and they say, well, what about transportation, blah, 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 blah. And you say, well, theoretically, if we could bring a fleet of limos to bring these kids wherever they wanted, then would you vote for the voucher bill? No. Okay, good. This conversation's over. Right? I have seen it is possible to incorporate some transportation funds into the allowable expenses of a voucher program. But ultimately, you can't make the perfect the enemy of good, right? We can't necessarily provide completely equal opportunities for everyone. All we can do is make things better than they are now in some instances. So it's a difficult issue. I think it can be dealt with, but not perfectly. But again, it shouldn't be an impediment to progress.
I'll just add to that really quickly. Something we have done in Florida, our corporate tax scholarship program not only allows students and gives scholarships for them to go to private schools, it also gives a scholarship for public school students who need transportation funds to get to another public school that meets their needs. It's a $500 per year transportation allotment, and a lot of students actually take advantage of that as well. So there are some things you can do through tax credits to get to the same angle that you're trying to reach. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to direct this to Senator Rogers, my dear friend from Cherokee County, Georgia. Senator Rogers, we've had some successes in Georgia, both with a special needs voucher and with a tax credit that accrues both to individuals and to businesses. And in doing that, we saw a lot of objections similar to what the gentleman from Arizona had highlighted. Objections that were more intended to be interruptions, that even if they had been satisfied, folks still would not have come over with us. Could you comment on the issue as we seize and hold the moral high ground in the argument, in the discussion on vouchers? The questions that will come up about means testing, the questions that will come up about by a lot of folks that want to make the legislation more likable to them, that in many cases they won't still support anyway, or that more importantly still won't garner the critical votes we need. What we saw in Georgia was that many of the compromises we were asked to make would not have allowed passage of the measure, and that what you helped usher through the Senate, in fact, was a pretty clean program. There was no means testing. It was as broad-based as it could be, and recognizing we normally just get one bite of the apple sometimes to make these arguments. Could you speak to that issue as these folks consider crafting legislation to keep some of these limiting amendments that would limit their effectiveness over time off of them when you're moving for final passage?
Well, I think the most important thing, again, is to keep in mind what it is we're talking about. I mean, we get dragged down to these arguments about these little details like transportation, and we take our eye off the ball, and that is, even if you have the greatest school system ever created, why would you want to stand against choice? It just doesn't make any sense. Which is better, less choice or more choice when it comes to education? I mean, there's no argument that less choice could ever be better. So we have to keep that. We have to keep that in mind, and as Representative Setzler points out, they're going to throw a million things at you to try to stop these things, and these are people who would never vote for it anyway. So you do have to try to keep those out of legislation as much as you can. But I will say this: a small step forward is better than no step forward. So one of the best things we have going for us, because our school choice programs are so new, is that we can now take back this report that I just showed you after 2 years. And so all those things they said were going to happen if we implemented special needs vouchers, none of the bad things have happened, and the only things that have happened have been good. So if you can take back real data that's happening really in your state and show them that, all your boogeyman arguments didn't come to fruition, that these programs that we're talking about actually work, that's your best case scenario. But again, I'm always been an advocate, as you indicated, to go for everything. I mean, the ultimate goal here is choice. And if you have to come back a little bit, you have to come back a little bit. But don't give in on those things that are going to relegate what you're trying to accomplish meaningless. I mean, you need to accomplish something. So don't give in to everything.
Yeah, if I could comment on that real quick, I mean, the issue of means testing has vexed the school choice movement. There's been serious disagreements about it. I think that generally where we are now is that there's a consensus that means testing at a too low level is a serious flaw in a bill, that it causes long-term sustainability problems politically. If your beneficiaries are of an income level that don't vote at very high levels, that's a problem. But however, on the other hand, I mean, the other tension is that we do, another simple response to people that say they want to means test your bill is like, great, you let me know when you means test the public schools and then we can talk. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That's right. There's a whole lot of millionaire kids in North Scottsdale in Arizona getting a lot of money to go to public schools, and that doesn't seem to bother you. I do, however, think that there are ways that you can design bills that do give an advantage for the poor that is not a means test, and I think that's smart, and I think that's good long-term strategy. I personally don't like means testing, but I do I do want to make sure these programs actually do help, the most disadvantaged kids. So there are ways to do that. They're a little tricky sometimes, but it can be done.
Something to add to that, or you? No? Well, I'd just add from the European experience, you can serve poor children in a market-based environment quite simply, as India has found. Ma'am, you had a question?
Hi, I'm Joyce Pepin. I'm a legislator in the state of Minnesota. And I don't believe that this should be a partisan issue at all. I believe this is something that everybody should embrace. But unfortunately, in our state, the unions are so incredibly powerful that I would say 3 or 4 Democrats have confided in me privately that they would love to fight for school choice, but unfortunately, the unions would come out in full force against them and take them out in the next election. So they are terrified to work with us in a bipartisan fashion. So my question to you is, do any of you have any really effective strategies for breaking the union so that some of my friends on the other side of the aisle will join with us and make some really positive changes for our state?
Well, I don't think you necessarily have to break the union, although it would be nice. I mean, the fact is the unions are finding themselves increasingly intellectually isolated, right? You just saw Michelle Rhee, right? Okay. There is a genuine sort of zeitgeist now about education, and it's all about, actually improving things. And who's guarding all the exits? It's them. Who's against merit pay, right? Who's against alternative teacher certification? Who's against school choice? Who's against all these things that we know work? It's them, right? So you see the emergence of Joe Williams is at the conference, the Democrats for Education Reform. I mean, I don't think you necessarily have to defund the unions in order to make progress. Now there are people that have tried that, and I fully support that. I don't know why a school district should be collecting dues from union members. Like, what if I'm a member of the, I don't know, the Glee Club or the NRA or whatever? Why aren't you collecting my dues? It seems unconstitutional to me. But in any case, I mean, I think it's possible to make progress despite the unions. And don't get me wrong, they're very powerful. I mean, any given state X, the most powerful interest group in that state are the teacher unions. Right? They are organized. They're in every legislative district. They play in elections. They give money. They knock on doors. And, I mean, someone like me can go in and say, you ought to do this because it's the right thing to do. And they come in and say, if you do this, I'll bust your kneecaps. Right? And it's a problem, but it's not an insurmountable problem.
I'd add to that 2 things. One is, I think as far as pushing legislation, a great example, which you talked about, Matt, in Arizona, which is I'm a big fan of football, and in football, just like any sport, you have to have deception involved, and that you have to think that they have to think that you're going to throw the bomb in order to get the first down. And so by having things like a pure voucher bill floating out there, by having things that are just absolutely what I would call philosophically nuclear to the the unions, you're able to move the ball down the field and get first downs and create, all these programs that we're talking about, VPK, McKay scholarships, tax scholarships, all these things are first downs that are moving the ball down the field. And we're getting closer and closer to the end zone. We're not there yet, not as a country, not as a state. So I would say having issues that are out there, making them have to play the pass so you can run the ball, okay? For lack of a better term, not to sound like a jock up here, but I mean, literally, you have to be able to do that. And then secondly, something that we've tried to do in Florida, and we're going to continue to push, is you can actually, by statute, pass a law that says that when the teachers actually pay their dues to the union, okay, that they actually would have to check a box saying they don't want their funds going towards political contributions. Let me tell you, you want to cut their dues, or their available funds for political contributions in half overnight. You pass legislation that does that, and all of a sudden, instead of them spending $30 million a year in your state on politics, they're spending 15 or 10 or 5 or whatever. That's a great way to do it. And I also tell my teachers when they come to me and say, we need a raise this year, and I say, well, the economy's bad and we're down on the budget. And they say, yeah, but I really need the money. I say, great. If you drop out of the union, you'll get a $1,000 raise.
The other thing, let me add to the Democrats for Education Reform. There's also the Black Alliance for Educational Options does a great symposium for Democrat elected officials. There are now enough stories around the country and enough people around the country. I think you're getting to a point where Pennsylvania, you've got in Florida, half the Black Caucus supporting this. You have people who could come into your state and say and share this news as a Democrat with you and with them and start challenging the status quo. That's something I know Bayo does, it's Friedman does. We fund those kind of things all over. So other questions? One more question.
Yeah, this has to be the last question. You did this to me
I was just
yesterday.
told, it's Darrell too.
Here it comes.
Okay, what does that mean, right?
Here it comes.
This won't be like yesterday.
comes.
Okay. State stabilization aid and the stimulus, basically. In New Jersey, $800 million, didn't have it, won't have it next year, that kind of thing. So is there any discussion about advancing alternatives to higher cost traditional public schools in the economic downturn as a way to kind of manage through this? I mean, I'd argue that, like, broadly, the cost of public education is just unsustainable in a lot of states and has passed sort of unsustainable marks. So I'm wondering if you're considering making those arguments, whether or not anybody thinks the downturn is a good time to push forward, or whether or not everybody's just it's too expensive, it's new money, we can't do it at all.
What I've been told, and I've seen it to be true, is that in these downturns, what happens is like people like me at think tanks come in and say, hey, you could do this and you could do that and you could save money. But we find that a lot of state lawmakers have adjourned to the corner over there and are in the fetal position because they're just, they just want to get out of this, right? It's like, I just want to get out of the session alive in one piece. Don't talk to me about, cutting school funding or this, that, or the other thing. Like, give me all the legislative budget gimmicks that I can get, Unfortunately, it ought to be a time where we're really thinking about some really serious reforms. And seeing a little bit of that here and there, but no. I mean, for whatever reason, I don't really understand it, but that seems to be the case.
I would argue that it is a golden opportunity because, and particularly in one area, and that is virtual education, because that doesn't seem to be, they don't seem to oppose that quite as much. So I think that we need to take these opportunities to say, we've been telling you all along this is the right thing to do. Now we're going to tell you that this is also going to save money. Because I don't know of any state in here that's not facing the struggles of budget shortfalls. So I'm going to run with it this year and use that as the 1,000,000th reason why we ought to have educational choice.
There's a person who offices from here, probably only a couple miles, who has a great line that says, "Never let a crisis go to waste." And I think we should follow our friend and that line of thinking and take advantage of the crisis.
Absolutely. I've been told we have one more question ability, and so who has that? Right there, Ira. Go ahead.
Ira Paul, Independent Voices for Better Education. As far as the Paycheck Protection Plan that you're talking about, it's been tried at least 3 times I know about where it's passed the Florida House. Our problem's been in the Florida Senate. Yeah. If we can advance it through the Florida Senate, then we can get it done. My next question is, or last question is, right now you have the unions and the PTAs are basically trying to represent education. You have parents out there that are not part of the PTA. You have teachers that are not Kool-Aid drinkers. And I think their testimony will be very important in legislative sessions so they can hear other things than the union and the bureaucratic talking points. What can be done to organize these type of people, or has that been tried?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. And I mentioned in the beginning that the Florida House is the conservative chamber in Florida. We have passed that bill 3 times, and we're waiting on the Senate to take it up. So in regards to, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're working with Doug, who's sitting right in front of you, on our corporate tax scholarship bill this year that's going to expand the program dramatically, which we're very happy about. And they're planning on bringing 5,000 students to that. And let me tell you, these students are 80% or 75% minority students. These are families that make less than $30,000 a year, and yet they're going to get on a bus and they're going to travel to Tallahassee, and we're going to have a march on the Capitol and have 5,000 people standing in front of the Capitol talking about the importance of school choice. So I think things like that make a difference. The visual of 5,000 people of color and race and diversity, that speaks volumes. And having them in committee speaking as well is important. But I think having rallies and having large groups like that together can help sell and drive home the point. So we're going to do that in Florida. I know others are doing it in other states as well.
Well, panelists, thank you very much. Let's give them one round of applause. And please don't forget to fill out your forms as quick as you can. The more feedback we get, the better this can be for you next year. We like customer service in the marketplace.